Some of you know that I've been slowly working my way through the various Star Trek series. I started with The Next Generation, and then I went back to the original, and then I've now made it all the way through Deep Space Nine, and I'm a couple of seasons into Star Trek Voyager. Now, what I love about Star Trek is the story and the characters. There's all kinds of futuristic technology that I don't pay that close attention to. They do transport and beat me up, beat me down kind of stuff, and they have all kinds of weapons that they're not really trying to use because they're exploring, but they on occasion have to use phasers and photon torpedoes. And then I don't remember if they have disruptors or if the other people have disruptors, but there's some kind of weapon called a disruptor, and I don't know how it works, other than it probably suggests that it disrupts stuff. And we know what disruption looks like, though, in our lives. Jesus does not have to walk into the temple with a disruptor ray, that's some futuristic weapon to stir the place up. He just walks right in and does it. Now, when he comes into the temple, it's the Passover. It tells us, and that means there's lots of people coming. And there's some particular things he takes issue with. He turns over the tables of the money changers. Now, they would have been changing money because you couldn't just give your offering in any old coin, like Roman coins. You had to use a certain one, so you had to make an exchange. Do you suppose they took a cut for that when they did the exchange? Probably. And why would you need to buy cattle or any of the other livestock that Jesus chases out of there? Sacrifice, right? So if you're thinking about it, like this would totally make sense to us in our day. I got to make a long journey, and I need to make a sacrifice so I can bring the cow with me, or I could just buy one when I get there, right? And then I don't have to hassle with it. Now, given the way we function, which generally is the same as it was back then, how do you suppose those animals were priced when you were kind of had a captive audience there? Probably pretty high, right? Just like when you go to the baseball game and you try to get food that's always really high because you can't get out of there. You got there, and now you got to have a sacrifice, so it's probably pretty expensive. So Jesus comes into this place where you now have animals being sold and money being changed. They've turned this faith practice that God had given them as this relationship function in the temple into some form of commerce, and he gets kind of mad about it. And so he flips over the tables, chases out all of the animals, and really disrupts the place. Takes the status quo and kind of upends it. Now we're hearing just kind of what happened, but you have to try to imagine what that would have felt like to the people that were there. Some of them, that is their commerce, right? And now they're lost a whole day of sales, probably. And Jesus has chased them out, and they don't know what's going to happen after that. There's some uncertainty. So they are experiencing the disruption that Jesus brings into the place. And I think we probably all know what disruption feels like. Sometimes we have positive disruption. Having a kid is disruptive in a good way. But often disruption comes in ways that are not great. Friday was March the 2nd. For me, that has become a day where I think about, I call it the day between the days. It marks, the day before that, March the 1st, is 5 years since my mom died. And March the 3rd is 19 years this year since my dad died. So it's the day between those 2 days that were days of great disruption. And they were disruptive in different ways. When my dad died, I was 25, and you weren't expecting that. It came as a total shock, and we're still trying to figure out how to be adults in the world, and now I can't call dad anymore, and I had to go home for a couple of weeks to go to the funeral. That's disruptive. And it was, disruptive to our family and the way that, we lived together as a family kind of spread out. And that made a whole new normal that we had to live in because our status quo changed. My mom's death and death is always disruptive. My mom's death was disruptive in a different way. With her, it was that we were now, I'm the oldest of three, so I'm the oldest now because my mom and dad are gone, right? And so somebody sent us a note that said, you are now the leading generation of your family. And that was really sobering, and that was disruptive in its own way, not to mention all of the stuff, the paperwork you have to do, and the making arrangements, and getting the house taken care of, and the car, and all the rest of that. So death came in these 2 ways, and both times it was very disruptive. And it changed things, and we had to adjust, and we had to have a new status quo. And I invite you just to take a minute, a quick moment here, to think about a time in your life. And it could be something with death, could be jobs, could be health, but something kind of negative that landed on you and is disruptive. And make things change and change your status quo that you have to adjust to. Just take a moment and think of that time. All right. So we get those disruptions that come. Jesus comes into the temple. He shakes the place up, changes the status quo. No doubt it was experienced as disruptive to those that were there. But I would suggest to you today that there is another kind of disruption that Jesus is really bringing about on that day. Long before Jesus' time, God had spoken to the people and said, you should bring sacrifices, and this is how you relate to me, and this is how we're going to live. I'm your God, and you are my people. And if you pay attention to the prophets and the Psalms along the way, there are more than one place where God says, I'm really not that interested in your sacrifices, because if those sacrifices are empty, and if they're not really meaningful, and they're not part of a meaningful sort of relationship, they don't really mean much. So the prophets are critical, and in the Psalms there's these places where God says, nope, I don't need a sacrifice. What I need is a broken and contrite heart, is what it says in Psalm 51. So you get these places where God is really trying to reset these expectations, but that's not where the people are. The people are in this place where they're just kind of buying their way into these sacrifices. There's people making money off of these sacrifices, and they've lost sight of the whole purpose of this relationship from the beginning. So when Jesus comes in and upends the tables and disrupts what's going on there, what he's really doing is disrupting a disruption. Because that marketplace has become a disruption to the faith and the relationship between the people and God, and it wasn't a healthy one. Their faith had been turned into this commerce function as opposed to a real relationship as a community with God. So when Jesus comes in there, his point, though they may have experienced it in the ways that you all have experienced those negative disruptions you just thought about, they may have experienced it that way, but that's not his point. His point is to take them to a place from that disruption into a place of life. So he disrupts the disruption to try to bring them a place where they have a different and whole and better relationship with God. Now that can happen in our disruptions. That's what Jesus does. In this particular case, he challenges them in a few ways. He first disrupts their economics that they have tied into their faith. Then they ask him, who said you could do this and what's the sign? And he tells them, well, tear the temple down and in 3 days I'll raise it again. And they're confused. They don't realize he's talking about him. But that's a disruption to their theology. And then the third thing, in talking about his dying and raising, he ultimately comes and disrupts death. So death has always been the great disruptor. It is the thing that comes every time. And Jesus coming into the world and dying himself and coming to new life disrupts death. So all this way, he's disrupting the disruptions. He's disrupting their economics, disrupting what they have going on theologically. He's disrupting death, this great disruption, so that life can come. And sometimes we experience that. When my dad died, I was not in a healthy place physically. And his death at my age of 25 and his age of 51 brought about some different ways of being for me. I lost 30 pounds. I've gained some of that back. But I exercised a whole lot more and have continued to. Probably it was a huge contributor into me getting a sense that my career was killing my soul and that a different path was necessary, and I didn't necessarily know what that was until God kind of knocked me on the head and said, the pastor thing might be what you should do. But all of that grew out of that disruption. And that's where I think Jesus comes in and disrupts the disruption and brings life into the places where we can only sometimes see death and negativity. Jesus comes and brings life into those places. And sometimes that life comes from the ways that we are disruptions to one another. About the time that my dad died, I had just terrible chronic back pain. It was started a few months into my career, and it would come and go. 6 months before my dad died, my mom's dad died, and the pain stopped going away. And I sold my car that was a kind of low to the ground car, got a pickup because I couldn't get in and out of my car. I had a stand-up desk at work, and I had 9 or 10 pillows I slept with. It was bad. Spent a couple of days in the hospital one time with just pains so bad I couldn't even walk. I had been a physical therapist, a doctor, a surgeon who was ready to cut me open. Luckily, I had a guy I worked with who had a really bad experience of back surgery and talked me out of it. And so with all of that going on, when my dad died, it got really bad. And then some months later, it got really bad again. A friend of ours, along the way, kept trying to tell me about this doctor she saw on Oprah. And so she said, there's this doctor I saw on Oprah, I think you should read his book. And I was like, I've been to doctors, and physical therapists, and chiropractors. I'm not going to read a book from a doctor that was on Oprah. That was not going to fix my problem. Like, I was not going to listen, right? And this went on for a long time, and finally when it got really bad again, and I was in probably the worst place I had been, she did everything except like buy it, open it up, and read it to me. But she really got in my face and kind of disrupted my status quo, because I had kind of come happy with that status quo that wasn't very great. It was disruptive to my life, and it was painful, and it was a struggle. And she got in there and got in my face and disrupted that and made me read this book. And the basics of the book was that some of us get ulcers from tension, and some of y'all get migraines, and I get back pain. And in a few months, totally different place. And ever since then, she changed my life by disrupting that negative status quo that I lived and gave me this different way of understanding it, and allowed me to live in a different space that has made a huge difference. So she was a disruption to the disruption that brought me to a place of life. And I think that's what Jesus does to us, just as he does in the temple, is comes into our life and disrupts those disruptions and brings out of the brokenness a place of life. But I don't think that that is where we should stop understanding this text. That's a very personal thing. And for all of the disruptions you thought of, you probably have also, many of you, experienced positive disruptions. Maybe not right at first, but where someone came in and drug you to that place of life that you didn't think you could get to. But Jesus is also, in this case, doing something very public. The temple, if you read through the Psalms, over and over you hear about the King, Mount Zion, and the temple. Those three things kind of are the image of the people and the place of power and the source of the identity of the people of Israel. So when he walks into the temple, he's not just going into a place of worship. He's going into the place that they have identified with the past kings that they had, and the hoping another king will come, and the financial stuff that's going on in the marketplace. This is all very public work. So when he flips over the tables and when he drives and does all of this disrupting, it is a disruption of the public sphere. He's disrupting economics, he's disrupting politics, he's disrupting all that goes together in that. So while, yes, we ought to hear this text and understand that Jesus disrupts the disruptions in our own personal lives and our own struggles, this also ought to be a call to us as the church to understand that we are supposed to be disruptive. When I was at seminary, we had the former presiding bishops of the ELCA came and visited with us and had a little speaking series that they did. And one of them suggested that a peaceful church was not a faithful church. A peaceful church was not a faithful church. And what he is suggesting is that if we gather here and figure out that we all can get along and be really peaceful, we've probably taken out anything that really matters and just tried to settle on being comfortable. And that is not faithful, he said. And if we understand that our task as the people of God is to be out in the world bringing a word of grace, sometimes that word of grace ought to be disruptive. So in our economics that we collectively share as a community, leave some people out, leave some people behind, and oppress other people, excuse me, then we have to be disruptive of that. What does that look like? Well, it looks all kinds of ways we can't unpack all right now. But when we have our politics, when they step on some people and advantage other people and leave other people behind, we have to be disruptive in that. Because that is exactly what Jesus is doing in this space, is coming in and disrupting the status quo in favor of God's vision of grace for the world. So my hope for us is that we can hear that Jesus disrupts the disruptions in our own lives and brings life into the death and the brokenness that we experience. But then knowing that we've been given this gift of life out of that death, carry that out into the world and be disruptive, intentionally disruptive, collectively as the church, so that God's grace can start to get into those places of injustice and brokenness in our community and do the work that God's grace can do when we bring that disruption so that all people might have life.